Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Dr. Robin Nagle, Director of the John W. Draper Interdisciplinary Master's Program at New York University. Robin is a clinical associate professor of anthropology and environmental studies at NYU and author of the book, Picking Up on the Streets and Behind the Trucks with the Sanitation Workers of New York City, Ethnography of the New York City Department of Sanitation. Her book is based on a decade of work with the Department of Sanitation, which included time on the job working as a uniformed sanitation worker. Robin's TED Talk, entitled What I Discovered in New York City Trash, has gone viral, generating over 1.5 million unique views. Dr. Nagle's work looks at the relationship between trash and cities. Within this broad perspective, she is especially interested in the people, history, and politics that are always inherent to labors of waste. She is also fascinated by the many ways in which garbage is implicated in every contemporary environmental crisis worldwide. Robin, welcome. Bob and I are so happy to have you here, and we're so glad that we met you.
And I'm so glad that we have connected. This is wonderful.
Yes, Robin, welcome and welcome audience. Robin, your bio indicates that you've led an amazing life with a diverse background of accomplishment in both the nonprofit and the private sector. What would you consider to be the greatest rewards of your career?
I think what I am most pleased with is being able to work in an academic context through the university, but always make sure that work has a real connection to the world in an immediate way, so that the questions that I look at are about really sort of almost very simple material concerns like garbage and where it goes and what happens to it after I let go of it, and then who picks it up next, and what are the histories and infrastructures. And so they're questions that are very basic, that always point to these really big meta-level questions, but that I can only explore by involving the people whose work that is. And then that always circles back into how I teach and what I teach, and making sure that my students are reading important material, and they always do a lot of writing, but that they're also literally on the street, that we go back into the city, that I introduce them to people who taught me details about what infrastructures make cities thrive and which ones are essential and why. And so I get, this is a long-winded answer, but I think what I'm most pleased with, and I don't want to use the word proud because I'm not done yet. Maybe when I'm all finished, I'll look back on my life and say, okay, I'm proud of this. But it's still very much a work in progress. So I am pleased with some of what I've been able to do so far, and how I've been able to braid together the research and work with the Department of Sanitation, the connection with the university, and the connection with my students. That, to me, makes this entire effort. When I get frustrated or think I'm on the wrong path, I look at that combination of those three elements, and I'm reassured that I'm doing the right thing and I'm in the right place. It's like the universe. I am where the universe needs me to be.
We agree. We think you definitely are. You know, Robin, when Bob and I met you, when you did the presentation, I hesitated in going because I said, what is this going to be? Is it really going to be interested? And you actually make this topic of picking up trash extraordinarily fascinating, in my opinion. Would you share with our audience who may not be familiar with you, Robin, how you came to be interested in the concept of trash, and how you came to be a trash anthropologist for the City of New York Department of Sanitation? It's incredible, I think.
Oh, well, thank you. It was quite by chance, or maybe by fate, or maybe this is God's hand. Who knows? But when I was about 10, my father and I were camping in the mountains in upstate New York. The Adirondack Forest Preserve is a remarkable wilderness that has been very carefully preserved. It was one of the first geographies that was ever set aside as a place that should be considered forever wild back in 1893. So even today, you can still find places that are as if no human being has ever been there. And so I'm a child, and this is around the time when Earth Day was becoming very popular, and my parents are kind of they're very much into environmental causes. They're sort of hippies, okay? And I think I can call them that, and they wouldn't be offended. But so my dad and I arrive at this campsite, and it's gorgeous. We're on a bluff looking over a lake, and the lake is crystal blue, and the mountains coming up from the lake are just it's better than a picture postcard or a movie version. It looks like a utopia. But then I discovered right behind our campsite a dump where people who had preceded us had been too lazy to take out what they had brought in, which is really one of the number one rules of camping. What you pack in, you pack out. So I remember very clearly there was an old sneaker, and there was there were balls of aluminum foil, and this will date me a little bit. There were packets of Tang, the energy drink, and it had that smell that garbage has a kind of a signature stink, and it had that stink. And I was livid. I was outraged. I was completely astonished and confused that anyone who cared enough about hiking in the woods, and this was several miles from the road, we were way deep into the forest, that anyone who cared enough to hike that far in, that how on earth could they not be bothered to take it out? And then the question that landed on me from that moment was, who did they think would be taking it away? Who did they think would be picking up after them? Who was going to come and clean up their mess? And that was the question that stayed with me from that point forward. Who cleans up after us? And how do we define the us? So that was the seed. And then it sort of marinated, if you will, or composted maybe is a better image. But it stayed with me. And as I went on in my schooling, and I never intended to get a degree in anthropology. I didn't even know how to spell the word when I took my first class. But when I discovered it as a really perfect place for me to focus my questions, not just academic questions, but big level questions, like the meaning of what it is to be human and how do we decide that according to whom and where and when. So when I found anthropology, it didn't occur to me I could bring my questions about garbage and discards into the conversation. In fact, it was quite a while before I understood that I could do that. And I started by teaching a class in 1995 called Garbage in Gotham, the Anthropology of Trash, which I continue to teach and refine, and is probably one of the best classes I've ever taught. So that the beginning was it was many, many years ago. And then it just sort of grew slowly over time.
Wonderful, Robin. Thank you for that. When you were talking about the Adirondacks, the first thing that popped into my mind, and maybe for our audience too, was Lake George. I think
yes.
that's Lake George is up there. And
yes.
Although I have heard about Lake George and have always wanted to go there, I just somehow never got to that part of New York State. And so, I've been to Buffalo and Rochester and Utica, but Lake George and that lovely area has eluded me. So I plan to put that on our bucket list at some point where Christine and I will get a chance to see how beautiful that is. And I know I could really relate to what you were saying about the coming to a place and seeing it almost defiled would be the correct word, I think. And I had that
that's
experience
a perfect word.
once being in Martha's Vineyard, and I came back up in the morning for an early morning walk, and I saw what had been done to the beach at Oak Bluffs, and I was horrified. So, but you're to be commended because you were only 10 years old and you did something about it.
Well, not for many years. We didn't do it. We carried out what we could, but we were just two people. We didn't do much. It stayed with me as the way I describe it in the book is to say that it was one of those moments when the naivete of childhood is sort of popped, is burst. You know, it was an eye-opening moment, and not in a good way, but it was an important lesson. It is a big puzzle to me, I have to say, even after all these years. And your story about the beach at Oak Bluffs, what is it that lets a person let go of something that then that's a problem, and it is a defilement. That's the perfect word. But how is it that we've lost a sense of shared responsibility for what I would call a commons, right? So the forest in the Adirondacks is a shared resource. It's a commons. We share it in common. The beach at Oak Bluff's the same. So how is it that the behavior of dropping a thing, a piece of waste that then qualifies as litter, right, and walking away, and that's all right. It's someone else's job. But how? I don't have. It's a rhetorical question. I don't have the answer to this. But how do we get to that? And was it better in the past? Were we less careless about kind of defiling spaces that we knew other people also had to share? Maybe we weren't. I am cautious about assuming a past that was somehow more utopian than practices today. I think that's usually pretty wrong, just factually wrong. But
I'm enjoying your questions, Robin. I think these are great questions for perhaps each of our audience members to answer for themselves.
Yeah.
Something that you spoke about, that there are so few places left in the world, but they are there, and we can recreate them, that are pristine, that it's a great opportunity. And, in terms of what Bob and I talk about and teach about in our work, lessening your stress, there's nothing more invigorating than being in a pristine place. Bob and I, before we were together, would go camping every year in the places as it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and to have areas like that we protect is a wonderful thing. And I think it's simply a matter of putting it in our consciousness that when we lose touch with the land, when we see it as you have said, in your talks and in your book, as someone else's responsibility, and don't understand our connection to the world, then of course it's easy just to discard anything anywhere and not have another thought about it.
Yes, I think that's part of it. And there are people all over the world working against that impulse, through education and through example and through legislation. And so I don't mean to sound quite so pessimistic, but yeah. So.
Well, the short answer, Robin, is that something that always used to work is that that school teacher look. We need more people around that would give that look, and they're like, oh, and they go inappropriate, and then they would pick it up or it wouldn't get dropped. But you raise a larger issue, which is a meta question. So, we'll have to have you come back and we could talk about that because I actually know about some research where what they looked at was they compared affluent areas which were clean and versus impoverished areas which had a lot of trash, and they were able to tease out when people went to an area that was clean, that was upscale, they didn't drop their garbage. But one of the things that's also not talked about is that, and I saw this when I first moved to Brooklyn, in Manhattan, there tended to be 4 garbage cans on the corner, northeast, southeast, northwest, etc. But when I went to Brooklyn, I was struck, except for just a few of the main boulevards, there were no garbage cans to be found. And so if you were walking down the street, I kept saying to people who lived in Brooklyn, where did he put your garbage? However, as we know, Brooklyn has changed in the last couple of years, but I suspect the next time I go to Brooklyn, there will be garbage cans on the corners. But that's part of it, too. Robin, let me just ask you this question. Your book, Picking Up, can you tell our audience how your book has been received by the media and what kind of feedback have you gotten from readers?
The media has been very positive. And the readership, I've been blessed with responses from people really from all over the world who have been glad that it exists, glad that there has been attention paid to people who do the work of keeping a city clean, from the perspective of, working behind a collection truck. So it's been quite rewarding. I've gotten emails from people who live in a completely different part of the country, but their father did work like this, or their husband does, or their sister just got hired by a sanitation company. And the rewarding part about the feedback is that what I've been told over and over is that I got it right. In other words, the details that I discuss and the stories I tell and the portrait I paint, if you will, of what it is to work behind a collection truck, all of that it rings true to people who that is their career. And another thing that's quite rewarding is when someone who's on the job here in New York working for the Department of Sanitation gives the book to someone who's either just come on the job to sort of help them get a jump on learning the culture of the department, or give it to a family member of someone who's just come on the job, so that family member will have a better understanding of the kinds of demands and constraints that their loved one is going to be under, especially as a new hire, because that's when you really don't control your schedule at all. So maybe you plan to go to your nephew's christening or your daughter's birthday party, but then you're called into work and you have to go to work, and you didn't know the day before that you were going to have to go to work. It's called bouncing. As in bouncing around the clock. So it's quite rewarding when people tell me that they gave the book to somebody because I got it right, and this will help that somebody understand a little bit faster what their job is going to be.
Wow, Robin, you just keep opening doors. You just opened another door. This issue of shift work, where people would be working rotating shifts and rotating days, and there's a whole literature on the sleep deprivation and the accidents and mistakes that it skyrockets when, and there are some people it not only throws up their circadian rhythm, but there's some people they're hardwired not to be able to tolerate working the graveyard shifts, 12 to 8, and you can see that something happens. I think also with the truckers, from the most dangerous time on the road. I think the last statistic I saw is between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. When people are trying to push it to the limit. So let me just ask you this, Robin. You did a TED Talk that was just simply amazing. When I watched it, we watched it. How did you come to do that TED Talk, and why do you think your TED Talk in particular went viral? You got over 1.5 million unique views and rising. So what do you think's going on there? With that. I mean, we know that you're fantastic, but all TED Talks are not getting those kind of responses.
Well, I think one big strength of my TED Talk is that it's short. It's just under 8 minutes. And I think sometimes people look at the options on for TED Talks and they see one that's maybe 17 minutes or 21 minutes, and it seems like just a little bit too much time. Oh, but there's one for it's not even quite 8 minutes. I'll listen to that one. So I think partly it's just because it's short. Other than that, I'm not sure why it would have generated that number of views. I'm delighted. I'm quite delighted because I think it's a very, very important set of themes. But I will say that when I talk to someone, when I meet someone for the first time and they learn about my work, without fail, they have their own garbage story and they are very eager to share it. And I almost think the problem of waste, especially the waste that we generate in our homes and our offices and whatnot, is it's very troubling for many people. And the chance to talk about that to someone who's not going to think they're weird, because garbage is weird, a weird thing to worry about, I think people are happy for the opportunity to talk about trash. So maybe that's one of the reasons why the talk has done well. But I do think that it's short. I really think that's key.
I think the short does make it great. I know I was surprised. I said, "Whoa, this is really excellent that you had so much information packed in to such a short, period of time." So that for me was what made it very attractive.
they actually told me I had 12 minutes, so I kind of blew it. I could have talked for a little bit longer, but I was quite nervous, and whatever. It's fine. And it turned out.
The nerves don't show at all.
Well, they do to me because I stand there without moving. I stand there as if I am becoming a pillar of salt. As I stand there, it takes me several minutes to even remember to gesture with my hands, and normally I gesture kind of a lot. So,
Robin, I just
when I look at myself, I know that I'm
statuesque.
Well, okay, good. Yes, statuesque. That's good, Bob. I'll take that. Of course, I was.
See, no one would have known if you didn't tell us. We thought it was fantastic. So,
thank you.
Audience, you're welcome, Robin. Audience, we'll be back in a moment on Learn to Live Stress-Free. We're speaking with anthropologist Dr. Robin Nagle.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., the stress relief doctor, co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series. I'm an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. My published study is the first to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, nitric oxide spiking, and the relaxation response. And my practical application of this knowledge helps you relieve the stresses of everyday life. I have the tools to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email me to find out how you can start to feel better now at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact. Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or pursuing a treasured dream? Christine Wright specializes in helping her coaching clients to lay out clear, elegant strategies. She shows you how to quickly build your confidence to uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Christine helps you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let Christine know that you're ready to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free. We're continuing our conversation with anthropologist Dr. Robin Nagle. Robin, we're so glad that you're on the show, and your topic is just really extraordinarily fascinating. I have to say it again. Would you share with our listeners what are some of the key stressors that sanitation workers face? You know, I think many in the public are not aware of just how demanding this job is, that as part of what you say, we take it for granted.
Well, let me start the answer by making sure that your audience knows that according to the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, sanitation work consistently ranks as one of the 10 most dangerous occupations in the nation, far more dangerous in terms of on-the-job injuries and fatalities than being a police officer or a firefighter. And usually when I say this, my listeners are incredulous to the point of they simply don't believe me. But here are some of the ways in which the job is extremely hazardous. A worker, different companies in different cities will structure the time differently, but in New York, you are expected to be ready to go by 6 a.m., so you arrive to work in time to change into your uniform and report to roll call at 6. That by itself I don't think is an inherently dangerous thing. Plenty of people have to start work at a very early hour. But once they're in the truck and on the street, the danger comes from three sources. They are in and out of the truck and therefore in and out of the street. So the motorist who is perhaps impatient to be caught behind a big white garbage truck. In New York City, they're white if they're public trucks, and they are painted colors if they're private trucks. Again, different cities have different designs and codes for such things. But any garbage truck, when you're stuck behind it as a motorist, that's not really where you want to be. So sometimes motorists will duck around the truck without pausing to think that because there is a truck stopped at that place and the truck it's not turned off. It's a truck that's still running. It means there's a human being, at least one, and in New York City too, connected to that vehicle. So, but that thought, that connecting the truck to the people working the truck, that doesn't happen. So one of the primary sources of risk is traffic, getting hit by, clipped by cars and other vehicles. So then the second source of risk is from the trash itself. When you are moving it, especially if you have you're moving relatively quickly, only because people set up a certain pace of their work. Some are quicker and some are slower, but you're moving in a rhythm, and you reach for a bag and you don't see that there's a piece of broken wood with nails protruding from it that is sticking out the side until suddenly that rusty nail has just punctured your leg, and now you are at risk of tetanus. And there's the whole host of medical interventions that should happen when you've been punctured by a rusty nail, or worse, when substances that should not be discarded in household waste are in that black plastic bag and you don't know the contents, and they encounter the truck, and the mechanisms of the truck can pop the bags, and then the garbage can come hurtling back out, and that's a tremendous source of harm. Just think about things like Christmas tree decorations when they break. That's glass, but it's such a fine glass that it becomes like a dust, and it can be when the hopper cycles, that's the back of the truck that scoops the garbage into the body of the truck, it can send that glass powder floating through the air, and you're not aware of it, and you turn and suddenly you have glass dust in your eye, right? I mean, that's one small example, but it happens. And once you create a bag of garbage, it's almost like all the objects in there are at risk of going rogue, and going rogue means they have the potential to do great harm. So, and then the third source of risk is the truck itself. There was a worker last year or the year before who he got out of the truck, and I don't remember exactly how it happened, if he thought he had set the brake but he didn't, or the brake failed, but it rolled over him. The truck, it's 19 tons empty, and it rolled. He lost his leg. So it's quite hazardous, and it's hazardous in ways that I think are hard for the public to consider, because we created the hazards. We require the work, and we created the concentration of material inside of a garbage bag or a garbage can, and that material is now hurting people. And that's a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. A cop or a firefighter react to a crisis, whereas sanitation workers deal with material we create by preventing, and by doing that they prevent a crisis, the crisis of the public health nightmare that would result if we were not relieved of our trash regularly. So I'm sort of getting into the philosophical side of it now, but I think that's one of the reasons that people either don't believe that the job is so dangerous, or even when I explain some of these details, they don't really want to accept it.
Well, thank you, Robin. I think that's so important, everything that you've just said. And I believe it's valid to talk about this philosophical side. Many people, as you say, are unaware of these dangers, and sharing this information here will certainly have people be more appreciative of this very important work in our society.
That's my goal.
I just, thank you for sharing that. I know in the presentation in which we saw you in Fort Lauderdale, you told a story about a sanitation worker who was killed accidentally. And I remember there was a gas that went through the audience, and that, when you describe how that happened. So there's no need to repeat that here, but the point is, I think as there needs to be an awareness, an increased awareness among the public, it would be helpful to say, okay, because who hasn't been stuck behind a garbage truck and not had thoughts of, well, he's blocking the street on purpose, and I can't get through. I'm late for a meeting, and so I think everybody is familiar with that. So, but I would like to focus on the part that you raised at the beginning in your last answer, which is in terms of personal responsibility. In your opinion, based on what you know now, what can the average person do in a practical way to reduce the amount of trash or garbage that their household produces? Because I think that in some way would moves it to the cause solution side.
Yes, there are lots of choices that we can make in the marketplace. Some of those choices are kind of hard to find, so that, for example, if I go to a shop and I want to buy certain foods in bulk, but the store only sells them in small prepackaged containers, there are lots and lots of choices that are out there. It's just that they're sometimes hard to find. I think one of the big choices that each of us can make is to consider certain kinds of purchases and what the life of that object will be after we are done with that thing. I do not want to preach, and I don't want to sound like, oh, you must go out and do X, Y, and Z, and then the problem will be solved. Here's one of the reasons I struggle with this question. We can each make choices in our lives that diminish the quantity of garbage that we create. But municipal household waste only accounts for 3% of the nation's waste stream.
Wow.
And one of the things that, it's a remarkable statistic. And one of the things that troubles me about a lot of the rhetoric around personal responsibility for waste reduction and also for recycling, like how to be really diligent about recycling, which, for the record, I think is a very, very important behavior that we are. This goes back to when we were talking earlier about the commons and a shared responsibility. I firmly believe that we do have a shared responsibility to recycle as much as possible the material that comes into our lives. But even if we all recycled perfectly, we're still not making an appreciable dent in the larger scale categories of waste that are not in the center of public focus at this time. So when people say, how do we reduce our waste, I want to turn that around and say, how do we bring attention to these many other forms that we don't see and that we don't really know about that are far more harmful on a far larger scale than our own individual household waste? So that's, I would say, there are a few sources I can send people to learn more about this, but my first teaching is, yes, I'm sure you can look around and decide ways to not use a plastic bag and not use a disposable coffee cup and not use, for example, a disposable diaper perhaps, although there's a debate about, is the disposable using more resources or is the reusable, the cloth diaper, since the bleach and the water and the heat and whatnot to clean the cloth is itself an energy use. But the cloth isn't ending up in a landfill. But my concern at this point is not how each of us can reduce our individual garbage collection, but how can we collectively begin to start the conversation or turn up the volume on the conversation about these many other forms of waste. And
so,
how
Robin, I have to cut in here, like
sure.
a New York City person. Well, what's the other 97%? If household waste is only 3%, I know our audience is waiting with bated breath. What's the other 97%?
The other 97% include medical waste, mining waste, a whole host of industrial forms of waste, the waste that come from various forms of plastics production. Nuclear waste is its own category, of course. Biosolids, which is when you, at the end point of certain forms of water treatment, of sewage treatment, what you have left is that's a waste that isn't counted in as garbage or as solid, as like household solid, municipal solid waste, which is one of the primary categories that the EPA measures. So if you think about manufacturing processes, the leftovers from those, plastics and rosin and forms of iron and steel and chemicals, organic and inorganic chemicals, pulps left over from paper processing, food waste, huge subcategory.
You have me thinking about the ponds, like tailings ponds, and then even like a pig farm. They would have these huge... okay, I get it now. Okay, all right. So this needs to be another conversation because the 97%, that's huge. Wow. So you're really doing a public service here.
Well, and here's something that some colleagues of mine have done a lot of meticulous research on. The rhetoric around recycling puts the responsibility on individuals and on cities. But really, the responsibility, I feel, should be far more equitably shared with the manufacturers of the plastics and the paper and all of these objects that we use in our daily lives, that then their end life becomes our job to make sure that they are put into the proper flow of what's next, whereas the creators of those objects do not have any responsibility, as legislation and as common practice currently has it in the United States. So when I talk about expanding the extraordinary effectiveness of curbside recycling, it's about how do we learn that this is the case, that municipal solid waste is only 3% of the waste stream. How do we bring more attention to this? And then how do we turn our attention to these other forms in a way that the same kind of groundswell of grassroots activism that was one of the beginning points of curbside recycling, how do we use that same energy and goodwill and dedication and passion and deep care for the well-being of the planet and the well-being of each other, how do we use that to address these other categories that are, I'm going to call them off stage? We don't see them, and so we don't think about them because we don't even know they're there.
So, Robin, I could tell you why your TED Talk has 1.5 million views. I'm dumbfounded with what you had said, although in your explanation, it seems obvious, but, I should put obvious in quotes. So, Robin, I want to thank you again for being our featured guest today, and, of course, we'll have to have you back to continue this very important conversation. I feel like we've moved into PBS territory.
Yes, Robin, thank you so much for being on the show. And we'd like to ask you to just take this time to tell our audience the best way that they could get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing and how you do your speaking engagements.
Yes, if people want to learn any more about me, or some of the talks I've given are there links to those. It's just robinnagle.com.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So, audience, you can get more information about Robin and her work at her website, which is ROBINNAGLE.com, robinnagle.com. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Great, Robin. And just before we move on, audience, Robin is also on Twitter. So you could reach her, because this is a fascinating topic, using the @RZNagle. So that's her Twitter handle is @RZNagle. I don't know what the Z stands for, but I'm sure it's exactly.
My son's first name is Zachary.
Okay, wonderful. So Robin's Twitter handle is @RZNagle. Robin, what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
2 key ideas, if I may. One is to think about the disproportion of waste about which we know almost nothing. And if you imagine tracing the objects in your home backwards to their sources, then you can begin to imagine where these other waste forms are in the process of creating and bringing to you that particular object. And the other thought is, next time you see a sanitation worker working in a municipal context or a private context, it would be okay to say thanks.
Fantastic. I know I have thanked, we have a private company here, but I have thanked the driver. And you bring up a good point about the importance of psychic reward and showing appreciation, and that's important to anyone. So, audience, I want to thank you for listening today, and I want to thank Robin again for being our featured guest. Audience, wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in right now, we appreciate your presence and trust that you'll benefit in some way from the information that Robin delivered on today's show. We welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about our show with Robin. Please let us know if there are any additional topics you'd like to see us cover, or a guest we had before whom you enjoyed that you'd like us to invite back. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to get the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how you can get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and you'll receive a free gift from us. Call today to schedule your appointment. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.